Hi, dear listeners. Before we begin Anne Marie's interview, I want to take a moment to share some context. Anne and I decided we want this interview to be a teachable moment for listeners, not just for survivors, but for anyone who works closely with trauma survivors and understanding how our stories radiate through our bodies. This episode may sound a little different from others you have heard on the podcast. This was Anne's very first podcast interview, and the first time she's had a space like this to speak openly, on her own terms, about what she has experienced. While editing, I noticed some common signs that can show up when survivors are telling their stories, especially for the very first time. You also have to note that some of these stories have been held in for so long. You'll hear my voice more than usual in the beginning, and that's intentional. When I work with survivors or pre-interview them, I try to create a space where they feel supported, heard, and seen. Sometimes that means stepping in a bit more to let them know I'm right there with them, especially when they are navigating something as vulnerable and layered, but most importantly, opening that Pandora's box of trauma. Anne showed such courage and generosity in allowing me to share some of the more tender and difficult parts of her tale. Because of that, I felt it was important to help her regulate her system and gently bring her back to baseline toward the end of our time together. We wrapped a little sooner than anticipated, so we didn't get to all of my rapid-fire questions. But I'd be honored to have Anne back for part 2 of her personal tale whenever she feels ready, in her own time and in her own way. I truly believe her voice is going to continue growing stronger, and she has so much to offer the advocacy space. Thank you so much, Anne, for your bravery, tenacity, and being the badass that you are. So with that, please note, this episode discusses sexual assault. While not explicit, listener discretion is advised. Thank you for listening and for holding space with us. Anne Marie Hauben is a survivor of sexual assault that occurred during a high school trip to Bermuda, where her assailant later went on to become a local politician. Anne's decision to break her silence is deeply rooted in the broader movement we have seen, especially after the brave testimonies of survivors like Dr. Blasey Ford, who addressed Brett Kavanaugh's Supreme Court nomination, and E. Jean Carroll, who courageously accused number 45 and 47, Donald Trump, of sexual assault. These public acts of defiance have shown the world the power of speaking out, and Anne's story is a crucial reminder that local cases deserve just as much attention and justice as the high-profile ones. Beyond sharing her personal experience, Anne has become an advocate for others. Last November, she organized and hosted a significant event for Callisto, an encrypted platform that allows sexual assault survivors to safely determine whether their perpetrator has harmed others, whether or not they choose to report the assault. By creating these spaces for survivors to connect and act on their own terms, Anne is helping to build a community that supports and empowers those affected by sexual violence. It is an honor and a pleasure to share Anne's story with you. This conversation will give you a powerful glimpse into the courage it takes to speak out and the importance of supporting justice on both a local and national level. This is True Crime in Hollywood, Anne's personal tale. Hi, listeners. Today is a very special interview because I am sitting down with Anne Marie. And Anne is someone who reached out to me on social media, and her story really touched me because there are certain elements that I really identified with in terms of myself as a sexual assault survivor, especially one that was 18 years old when that happened. And so when Anne reached out to me, not only did she share her story, but she also reflected on what elicited her to break her silence, which was really important to me because there are some parallels in terms of what we have seen as survivors in the political atmosphere, if you will. And something that we don't recognize too often in America is that, politics and assault can kind of go hand in hand, when we're talking about this. But what struck me was that this was more on a local level. and local politics. And what Anne said to me was that watching someone like Dr. Ford go up against Brett Kavanaugh, this was a very pivotal moment for her. So I don't want to share her story. I want to sit here and turn this time over to her. But first and foremost, Anne, thank you so much for reaching out and doing one of the most bravest things that you can do as a survivor. So welcome to True Crime in Hollywood.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to talk to you because I feel like I have an important story to tell, and it's a story that I want to use as a tool for prevention and
Mhm.
education because I don't want my kids, I don't want their friends, I don't want anyone else to go through what I've gone through, not just in the assault, but also the aftermath and, the
Absolutely.
reaction from the negative reaction from people.
Yeah. So to start from there, one of the things that I do like to do up top is to kind of talk about your upbringing first and talk about what childhood was like, because we're going to get to a point where this will all make sense. But let's start there. So can you share with me where you grew up and yeah, what was life like?
So I grew up in New England, in Massachusetts, um, in a middle class town, maybe upper middle class, I'd say. My mother died when I was 7 years old. She had non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. I had an older brother and a younger brother. So this was 19 in the 70s that she passed away. A few
Mhm.
years later, 3 years later, my dad remarried, um, and I acquired a stepbrother and a stepsister. So, and their father had passed away also. So there was no
Mhm.
other home that we were going to. We were all
Right,
under the same roof.
right.
And I was, told to call my stepmother mom, which
Yeah.
was confusing to me as a child, because I had a mom. So even as an adult, it's difficult. Like the word mom for me to use, it's hard. Even to use it for my real mom because I
Yeah.
was meant to call my stepmother. I was told to call my stepmother mom. So that was always confusing and is still confusing. And especially because it was a very chaotic home that we lived in. Abusive, I would say. But with every home, there was, good times, but then there was really, really bad times.
Yeah.
And there was verbal abuse, sometimes physical, definitely emotional.
Mhm.
Um, and, my father, people say, well, where was your father? I'm like, well, he was there, but my dad has a very hard time with anything with conflict, number one.
Mhm.
And like he would stick up for us,
Mhm.
but like at the same time, he didn't get us out of that unhealthy situation, which is kind of hard to reconcile in my mind. I wasn't living his experience, but now that I have kids, it's hard for me to think back in my childhood and be like and think, well, why didn't you get us out of that? Why didn't you protect us?
Yeah.
So it was a very chaotic home. There was a lot of comparing, there was a lot of fighting, there was a lot of swearing. My stepmother was very like OCD. She
Mhm.
and probably like real OCD. I don't
Yeah.
know if she was ever diagnosed, but like she would vacuum the entire house from top to bottom every single day. And
Wow.
after she vacuumed, you couldn't go like in your room because you would make footprints on the perfect carpet lines of the rug.
Right. Right.
Like you would never know that 5 kids lived in this house. And like she
Wow.
worked part-time and she would come home and scream about what a mess the house was. It
Mm.
wasn't a mess.
Yeah.
And but when you're living this as a child, you don't know that it's not normal because it's
Yes.
all you know.
Right.
Um, so I didn't really say anything. Like my friends all knew that it was kind of weird in my house, and we didn't have friends over. We weren't really allowed to have friends over except for my stepsister. She was the only one that was allowed. It's weird. There were like rules for her kids and then her stepkids, and I have other
Wow.
friends who grew up in houses similar, blended families like that. And these days, I feel like there are more resources to help blended families. coexist together in a
Right.
more like harmony,
Yeah.
and but back then there was nothing. There was no bereavement therapy for kids
Yeah.
losing a parent, which is such a traumatic thing to happen to a child, um, to lose one of your primary caregivers
Mhm.
suddenly like that. My mom was only sick for like 6 or 7 months before she passed
Oh
away.
my gosh.
Um, and I didn't go to her funeral because, the adults around me were making decisions for me. And I always felt guilty that I didn't go to her funeral, even though it wasn't my decision.
Right.
Um, so, then when my dad and my stepmother got together and they got married, we all lived in the same town, but they each sold their respective houses and we moved into another house in the same town. So
Okay.
we were still, living there. So that was it was also difficult that we had to, and I was at a private Catholic school and then I had to go to public school and, it was just a lot of upheaval. And then, you know,
A
we're
lot of
living
major
in this,
change.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
very chaotic environment, which wasn't, as a child and something it's so important to me for my kids is that home be their safe space. It's like
Yes.
the place where you can go, your escape, where you can be yourself and you can be comfortable. Like at my house growing up, we were walking on eggshells. It's like, what kind of a mood would she be in? Is she going to be in a good mood? Is she going to be in a bad mood? Like I would remember literally like holding my breath when I would come downstairs in the morning until I knew whether she was in a bad mood or a good mood. And that would like, set the tone for the whole day.
So
It,
you're
it was
already in
not
survival mode.
uh,
Yeah.
absolutely in survival mode, but I didn't know I was in survival
Yeah.
mode.
Right.
When you're
Hmm.
in it, like now as an adult, I
Hmm.
can see it. I know.
Right.
And people have all this nostalgia for the 70s and the 80s, and I have some as well, but sometimes when people talk about certain things from the 70s, or I see like a commercial from the 70s on YouTube or TikTok or something, those nostalgia like
Hmm.
accounts, it gives me this feeling of anxiety rather than a
Oh,
feeling of like comfort from of the past.
yeah. Right. It's not
And I
like an
could think
actual
of
nostalgic feeling.
or
You're
like the Brady Bunch theme song. Like
oh,
it reminds me of like right before dinner and we'd all be like downstairs watching TV and having to go up to eat family dinner. We would eat family dinner at the table, which was kind of remarkable because it was our 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 home life was so not normal, but that was like we did do that. We did eat at the dinner table, but just like those theme songs of those old shows, um, when I hear them, it just brings me back to being in the family room downstairs and like after school and all the anxiety that I was feeling.
yeah.
Part of that PTSD from
Right.
that.
Right. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I know that's difficult and it's very vulnerable of you to share,
It,
but it sets the landscape
yeah,
for
it
the
kind of
listeners.
paints a picture of how we were
Yes.
growing up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that will take us to where we'll go next into your story. But before we get there, I want to go a little bit backwards because you shared your story and you broke your silence specifically on social media. Can you talk to me? What was that tipping point and what like made you feel compelled to start talking?
Um, well, honestly, I didn't know I didn't know what to do, but all I knew was that I couldn't do nothing. Um, so the person who sexually assaulted me in high school ran for city council in the town we grew up in,
Mm.
despite knowing he has done this to somebody, me. And my roommate from the trip, she sent me a private message with the link to that he was running for city council. And she
Mm.
just wrote UGH, ugh, like,
Yeah.
because she was equally as disgusted that he would have the nerve to run for public office with this in his past. And when I opened that message, when I tell you that my heart started racing, like um it felt like I was right back there in 1990. Like my heart was like beating out of my chest, and then I couldn't fall. Like I opened it when I was, you know, going to bed, and then I couldn't fall asleep because I had so much anxiety about this. Like how dare you? Like how could you do this? Run for public office, like what you did doesn't matter, and like I don't matter. Like I
Right.
do matter, and I'm not the same quiet kid that I was in 1990.
Right. So from there, then I want to transition into your story.
Okay.
And again, and this is a moment for you to share what you would like, and take it at your own pace and feel free to share what you would like.
Um, so back in the 80s and 90s, I don't know how much, around the time when I graduated from high school, a lot of schools in my area would go to Bermuda for their April spring break. It was a short flight. At the time, you didn't need a passport. All you needed was a birth certificate, and the drinking age was 18. And there was a big drinking culture in my high school. Um, so, a bunch of us went down there. It was not chaperoned. It was just a bunch of kids. It was not affiliated with the schools in any way. There were no parents there. We just went and, like I said, there was a big drinking culture in my high school, and we went down there and we partied, and we went to there was a bar, one specific bar that we'd go to every night and dance and, drink and hang out and have fun. And we would drink at the hotel before we went to the bar. And, then at the bar, I remember, we were not experienced drinkers as far as being at a bar. Like back at home, an older sibling would go to the liquor store, get you a case of beer or whatever. So now we
Right.
have like liquor. And I remember that the cocktail that a lot of us ordered was a Long Island iced tea, which is very potent. And I was very small.
Mm,
I'd say I was a late bloomer. I was maybe 120 pounds. Like I was really thin. And, I could drink probably the same as a lot of other kids, but I would be that much drunker because I was so tiny. Not to say that other people were like big, but I was exceptionally small. Um, so this one night we were at the bar, and this classmate, um, I remember I was standing at the bar, and he approached me, and he immediately separated me from the rest of the group and walked me out of the bar. And the bar was on the second floor. I remember him walking me down the stairs. And I remember having trouble navigating the stairs because I was so intoxicated. And I don't know what he said to me to get me to leave with him, but he was not somebody I was even friends with. And he was actually somebody I actively tried to avoid in school because he he gave off, in my opinion, a vibe that was not kind to his peers,
mm,
unless maybe you were in his inner circle.
mhm,
Or but and I'm dating myself here, a lot of people might describe a kid like this as an Eddie Haskell, which is a reference to Leave It to Beaver, a kid who, around the adults and the coaches and the teachers, they would think that he's like, you know very polite and
mm,
nice and well spoken to the teachers, but around his peers wasn't very nice. And other people have said similar things to me, in writing, in messages that they've sent me, that they got the same vibe from him in high school. So he was somebody I actively tried to avoid. And actually, uh, in 11th grade, I was in the same history class as him, and the teacher at the beginning of the year said that we were going to have to do an oral presentation, do a research project, and then present it to the class. And I was not somebody at that point in my life who was very comfortable talking in front of people, particularly my peers. And this guy was in the class, and I don't even and some of his friends, and I don't even remember which friends of his were in the class, but I specifically remember he was in the class, and I said to myself, there is no way in hell I am going to get up here in front of him and his friends and do an oral presentation. So I lied and said that the class was too hard for me. And I dropped down into a lower history class just to avoid that whole situation. Like that is how much I tried to avoid this individual. And
Wow.
I was almost successful up until about 2 months before graduation, month and a half, April, graduation was the beginning of June. Um, and so he led me out of the bar and into a cab. And this was not when everybody was leaving. It wasn't like the bar was closed and everyone was leaving. It wasn't like we were like hanging out all night and making out and dancing and flirting. And then we left together at the end of the night. Not that that would have been like consent either for um, sexual activity, but just to paint
Mhm.
the picture, like we weren't interacting. Like he approached me, saw how drunk I was, immediately walked me out of the bar, put me in a cab, and then we were in the back of the cab, and he was so aggressive that I felt smothered. I felt like I couldn't move. I was not reciprocating. And the cab driver, who was an adult male, I remember him making a comment about not having sex in the car, which took me aback because I was not somebody who was having sex at that time. I was not sexually active. Like, of course, we're not going to have sex. Why would we have sex? I don't have sex. Um,
Right.
and then the next thing I remember, in my room, back in my hotel room, and I'm sitting next to my roommate on the bed, and I leaned over to her, and I was still extremely intoxicated. And I leaned over to her and I said, my underwear is on sideways. Now, I have never gotten myself dressed and put my underwear on and not if you put your foot in the wrong hole, you immediately know that you're doing something wrong and you
Right.
fix it.
Right.
Like
Right.
even when you're intoxicated. So, because I blacked out, some of the stuff is left to like it's almost worse because I'm like, is it worse? Is what happened to me worse than I even imagined? And like that not knowing is almost, I feel almost worse because my mind goes in several different places. But the my friends and I, when I got back to the room and my underwear was on sideways, my clothes were disheveled. I didn't know how it got like that. Both of my roommates remember there being blood, which would make sense because I had never had sex before. And one of my roommates, the one that I wasn't as close with, was yelling at me, saying things like, how could you do that? And aren't you embarrassed? And I didn't know what to do. And like, yes, I was embarrassed. And I didn't, and she was, in my opinion, and she was the type that was always very worried about what other people would think and popularity and stuff like that. So and she wouldn't have been saying those things if all we had done was made out, like we knew that he had had sex with me, and then he bragged also prior to this, bragged to all of his friends that he had sex with me, and that was told to me that all the boys on the trip knew what he did or what happened. Um, but they knew his version of events. They didn't know, and they knew from a 1990s context. So I didn't know what to do. So I did nothing. And I'm in another country. I'm 18 years old. And then I think we still had a couple more days left of the trip. So to protect myself, I just buried it. And with anything, like I think in my head that, as time will pass by, I'll start to feel better and I'll start to feel less anxious. And you do, but at the same time, with something that traumatic, it doesn't stay like if you say something like, stupid like that, you're like, oh my God, I can't believe I said that. And that eventually, and you feel a little bit anxious about it, but that eventually goes away.
Right,
But with
right.
something so traumatic, it doesn't stay buried forever. And it will continue throughout the course of your life to bubble up when you don't expect it. When you hear a certain song, like there were two songs that were very popular at that time, Sinead O'Connor's "Nothing Compares to You" and Vogue. They were like new out on the radio, top 40, and they were played a lot on that vacation. And I can't listen to those when those songs come on the radio. I immediately change the radio station, because it brings me back to that, and um, I can't hear it. So I go home, and I didn't have parents. I talked about the chaotic home I was living in. I didn't have
Mhm.
the type of parents that I could go to with something like this. Um, and I was, kind of quiet in school, so I wasn't gonna and there was a power dynamic too. Like he was more popular. He was like a football player. And then I always felt like, he picked me, like all the girls there were very intoxicated. And I always felt like, oh, he picked me to do this too because I was less important. Like I wasn't as popular, I wasn't as pretty, and um I didn't matter. I was, expendable. Nobody would care if he did this to me. Um, and that was part of like the shame that prevented me from talking about it. And then there was a lot of self-blame too. But then, in the 1990s, there was a big public service campaign, I remember specifically about, non-stranger sexual assault. And, the person who does this to you is not, it's probably not going to be the stranger who jumps out of the bushes. It's going to be somebody that you know. And the
Correct.
majority of these sexual assaults that happen to people by somebody that they're friends with or known to them in some way.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, sadly, you think you're with your classmates and you're safe, but
Yeah.
you're not, because there are those men who lack empathy, and they don't see you as a human, or they don't, they can't, they don't care about the harm that they're going to cause. It's very like selfish that they are going to do what they want to do, and it's just this massive violation of your
Mm-hmm.
body and your rights. Your
Yeah.
right to bodily autonomy. Like, I didn't consent to that. I didn't go from like making out with people to having sex like in one night. Like any reasonable person would of, average intelligence would understand what that was. And that wasn't a choice that I made. Like, people like I chose to go on the trip to Bermuda. That I regret having that like intercourse happening that night.
Right.
I can't, it's not, regret isn't the word that I could use for that because it wasn't a choice that I made. And,
Mm-hmm.
Somebody wrote in a message to me recently that you know, I was just really drunk, and I'm saying this because I'm mad that, oh, this person said that their friend was there. What that means, I don't know. And I was just really drunk, and I'm mad that he married somebody else.
No,
And,
no, 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 no,
that like literally is laughable
no.
almost. It's so absurd.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
But that goes to show that victim shaming, blaming exists.
Yeah,
And this is,
absolutely.
and if we think about it in this context, it was the early 1990s, right? So even more so, I mean, I was only a few years old at the time, but
Mhm.
I would imagine that these types of conversations weren't like a very common thing as it is more so today, obviously, given like social media and all of that. But you are internalizing this now for decades. before
Mm-hmm.
the point that you're ready to start speaking this into reality for people
Right.
to wake up. So I know for myself, when we first connected, because I was also 18 years old, right? And I was raped, but I was raped by somebody I didn't know. But one of those identifying things that I felt like with you in terms of like that kinship was that all this time went by, right? And it was like until you reach this point of reconciling your PTSD one. But as you shared, you already were going through such a difficult time in your home life, let
Mm-hmm.
alone then to progress and try to navigate adulthood now because you were on the cusp of graduating when this occurred.
Mm-hmm.
How did that manifest in you then for over those decades of holding this inside and then obviously getting the news that, oh, he's now trying to put himself, in the public eye in this capacity. So yeah, how did that like brew for you over that time?
Well, it was very difficult because obviously it was a huge blow to like my self-esteem and who I identified as a person and my confidence. It was a blow when he, like I said, when he ran for public office, I was a little shocked. I mean, I was shocked, but at the same time, not really shocked because he and I don't know him, but he gives off like in the public speaking things I've seen him engage in, he gives off this air of arrogance and self-importance. So I had reached out to him 7 and 5 years before he ran for city council. And I reached out to him because of the pain and suffering that he had caused me. And I wanted to know if, because now he is a father and some of his children are female. And I wanted to know if he had a different perspective on what he did, because obviously, I mean, no father would want that to happen to one of their kids, girl or boy or non-binary, like any child that they had. So I wanted to see if there was any sense of personal responsibility, any feeling of remorse, or if he had anything meaningful to say about what he did. Um, and the reason I was compelled to reach out to him 7 years ago, the first time I reached out to him was because 4 years after this happened in Bermuda. So in 1994, I ran into him in a bar in Boston. And I remember it was very crowded in this bar. And I was walking through the bar and I didn't see him, but he saw me and he got my attention and he tried to engage me in conversation. And seeing him was extremely triggering. And all I wanted to do was get away from him because, um, obviously, being that in that close proximity of him again made me very uncomfortable. Um,
Mhm.
but in this brief exchange, he threw out to me, "Oh, sorry about Bermuda," which, I don't I have told people that, but I don't tell many people that because people will say, "Oh, well then what's your problem? He apologized. Why are you still going on and on about this?" But I don't I consider that more an admission of wrongdoing than an actual
Yes.
apology. Because
Right.
one, if you were actually sorry and remorseful and you felt bad, where were you for the last 4 years with this apology? I still lived at home. I still have the same phone. You could look me up in the phone book. You could have knocked on my door. You could have apologized, but you're going to just throw this out at me in a bar, a crowded bar? And I mean, I'm 22 years old now. I'm still living with the stepmother in this chaotic home because, I'm still not financially dependent yet. Also, when you gave me this so-called apology, did you also then tell your friends who you bragged to about this that you apologized to me and this wasn't my fault? Absolutely, he did not. Absolutely, he did not. So with the Me Too movement, it was very um, validating. And I'm very grateful for the women who started that movement. But at the same time, as many people in my who this has happened to, it was also very triggering. And, it was around that time. And it was actually the Brock Turner, Chanel Miller,
Yes.
Brock Turner assaulted Chanel Miller. That was very triggering for me because it felt
Hmm.
so similar to what happened to me.
Hmm.
And in that first message I sent him, I also sent him a link to the article about what Brock Turner did. And, I said that this felt very similar to what happened to me. And so I was curious also. So if you were actually apologetic in 1994 when I ran into you, you would still be apologetic. Or even if you didn't want to put anything right, you could have been like, here's my phone number, give me a call, let's talk about this, like a responsible adult father might do. Oh, hold on, I just lost my train of thought.
It's okay. Let me ask you a question though, right
Okay.
here. Um, because you're talking about something that I don't think survivors really discuss when we are sharing our stories and we are reflecting back on these individuals that gave us lifetime PTSD. What would it mean to you if he did apologize to you? Would you accept his apology? Because I think about this all the time,
Yeah.
actually, of okay, so what if this individual came to me and apologized? What would I do? Would that allow me to heal more? Like, what do you think that would do for you if he were to say, I want to sit down with you, I want to talk about Bermuda, and I owe you a proper apology? What would that signal to you?
That would have signaled, for one, a sense of personal responsibility, um, maturity, that he is not the same person that he was in 1990 when he did this, that he had grown as a person. Um, but at the same time, I still feel like if you've done something like this, it still takes you out of the running for public office. And that needs to be a message to all young people that what you do as a young person, still matters, especially something as egregious as this, like
Right.
sexual assault, like
Mhm.
drunk driving, like
Mhm.
murder, like
Mhm.
any of the big ones. Like
Right. Major crimes. Yeah.
especially they're crimes. And it's so common for victims of sexual assault to not come forward because of the way people react and the poor way victims are treated so poorly by their community. And do I think that if I had been able to report this and speak out in 1990, it would have gone better for me? Absolutely not. I think it would have been 100 times worse. It would have been more traumatic. I didn't have the support system that I have now. I didn't have the all the years of adult experience behind me. I didn't have the resources. I didn't have the wherewithal. I didn't have the language back then to to navigate any of that on my own because my parents and you know I'm speculating, but I do feel like my stepmother would have been more concerned about what people would think than my well-being and getting justice for what happened to me. And I do think that I would have been blamed for drinking and that it was my fault. Um, but as we know, a person who is intoxicated or asleep or incapacitated in any way cannot consent to sexual activity.
Correct.
I sent him that message, that first message, and I could see that he read it because it gives you that little red receipt.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but he ignored it and he
Yeah.
didn't respond. And I didn't follow up
Yeah.
until 2 years later when something else was triggering and I was having a really hard time, and I sent him another message. And this one was a little more less nice. It was a little more pointed, I would say. Um, but this time, I don't even think he read it because there was no read receipt. I think he just saw it was from me and he blocked me.
Mm,
So
okay.
clearly, that so-called apology in the bar was feels like he was trying to absolve himself of wrongdoing. Oh, if I say I'm sorry, then this isn't going to come back to bite me later on.
Yeah.
Because if you were actually apologetic, you would still be apologetic, and you would, as a responsible grown up in your 50s, you would know that, geez, if I run for public office, I have this in my past that could, be something that might come out.
Yeah. And and so from there though, it did move to you now breaking your silence though to some local Facebook groups. Talk to me about those moments.
Yes. So, like I said, I didn't know what to do, but I knew that I couldn't do nothing. And I did. It's not like I went from zero to posting things on Facebook. Like I tried other avenues. Like again, like even the reaching out to him the 5 and 7 years before, that was an avenue I first tried to explore. And then in the summer of 2023, when I didn't know what to do, I reached out to a friend of his because I couldn't contact him because he blocked me. I was going to go knock on his front door. So I reached out to his friend and I said, your friend did this. And I had this idea in my head that we would have this conversation, and I would say what I needed to say and see if he could comprehend or understand how what he did affects somebody in such a significant way. It affects their entire life. Like to the men who do these things, it's just sex. Like and they don't care how they're ruining somebody else's life, and the person that they are, the person that they could have been, because this derails your whole life, as you know, and any survivor listening to this knows. Um, and the men that do this, they don't take that into consideration. It's a very selfish act um, that they do. So I reached out to his friend, and I, had this thought that people are inherently good and would do the right thing. And I would say, and I don't think it's appropriate for you to be running for city council with this in your past and going around saying that, claiming to be this good person who, um, and he said in a public forum about himself that he is somebody in which integrity and character and facing difficult truths are the most important things to him. Um, so things kind of went sideways with his friend. We had a few exchanges back and forth, and my husband, and I had never told my husband any of this until June of 2023. I literally
Wow.
couldn't get the
Yeah.
words to come out of my mouth.
Yeah.
Back when the Kavanaugh hearings were going on, I did
Mhm.
send him a text at work one time, and I said to him in this text, because the Kavanaugh hearings were so triggering and triggering to a lot of survivors, and not to say
Mhm.
that, you know, Dr. Ford shouldn't have been talking about this because it was triggering for so many people. Of course, she should be talking about this, and of course, she should um, bring this to light. It was important for people to know. And yes, it is triggering, but it's not Dr. Ford's fault that it's triggering. It's the people
Right.
who assaulted us fault
Mhm.
that it
Mhm.
was triggering. She did the right thing, and
Mhm.
she was somebody who was one of the women who inspired me to come forward. And also the women in John Krakauer wrote a book called Missoula, Rape in the Criminal Justice System in a College Town. And I read that book. It was recommended to me by a friend who knew what I was dealing with. And I read that book, and like I read that book with a highlighter in hand, and I go back to it sometimes and read the parts that really spoke to me. That book was when I first learned of Dr. Lissack, and you're probably familiar with him. He's a renowned researcher on this subject and a survivor himself.
Right.
Um, but the women that John Krakauer wrote about in that book, they were, young college women, and I felt like um, if they were able to do what they went through with a full criminal trial, which is so re-traumatizing, and you have the defense attorney attacking you and attacking your credibility and invalidating what happened to you. It's just like it's like beyond terrible. It's everybody's worst nightmare. So those women, felt like if they could do that, I could do what I felt like I thought was the right thing to do. But, when things went sideways with his friend, and my husband and my other friends, they were concerned that a meeting with him, I would either just knowing how he seemed to be, they felt like a meeting with this guy would either leave me feeling the same or worse. And they didn't think it was a good idea. So I put the brakes on that and I stopped contacting his friend. So when the Kavanaugh hearings were going on, I got sidetracked. I when I texted my husband at work, I said in the text that I was sexually assaulted in high school. I want you to know that, but I don't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
And I wrote in a text because I knew I wouldn't be able to say the words. And
Right.
when I finally did tell him in 2020 and 2023 in June, um, even though I knew he would be supportive and understanding, and he is a man that has empathy, and he's, a very reasonable mind, and he's, I'm, because of my life experiences, I'm can be more driven by emotion, where he's kind of like the rock that is the reasonable mind that kind of, how people are
I
told.
get what you're saying.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying? You
Yeah.
have the
Yeah.
reasonable mind and the
Right.
emotional mind, and you're supposed to come together and make the
Yeah.
wise mind. Like the
Uh-huh.
two of us together make the wise mind.
Yes. Oh, I love that. Yeah.
That's what I'm getting at. So even though I knew he was somebody, a safe person that I could go
Mm.
to, it was still so hard to get the words to come out of my mouth. And I literally got like three words out, and I started like I couldn't talk. I was so emotional and upset. And I did manage to eventually finish telling him everything. I eventually decided, you know, with the advice of professionals, that I would put out a statement about what happened to me, because about what he did, because I felt like, and this was weighing so heavily on me, and it was so triggering, and it was like I have this information and I know this, and he's misrepresenting himself to the people in this town who will be voting for him. And it felt like a huge responsibility of mine to tell these people. But at the same time, it's scary when you come forward with something like this. And I was so sure, so naive. I was so sure that the good people in this town would have my back, like publicly. And many people have had my back, but it didn't unfold in the way that I had envisioned in my head. Like with the advice of professional people, I made the decision to put out a statement because I felt like it was important to the voters in Melrose, and also to myself too, personally. Like this felt like this felt like a secondary attack, him running for city council. Like, you don't matter. I'm going to run for city council, and it doesn't matter that I did this horrible, horrible thing to you. You're going to sit there in Connecticut and with your mouth shut, because, survivors have to be worried about, being sued for defamation. So it felt like it, a secondary attack. It felt like, um, he was unintentionally, but intentionally saying, you don't matter, and I'm going to run for city council, and you're going to sit there in Connecticut with your mouth shut. Um, because, men who do this know the risks that people take when they do speak out, and
Right.
so many people don't.
Hmm.
And I felt like I couldn't be afraid, and I felt like I couldn't someday tell my kids all of this and
Yeah.
have them say, well, what did you do? And just
Hmm.
say, oh, I went to therapy. I needed to
Right.
be able to tell them that I stood up for myself. I stood up for the voters in Melrose. I stood up for all survivors. And I'm not trying to say that I am like the savior of all survivors, but it just felt right
Yeah.
to speak out. Like staying silent, I felt I already had so many regrets that if I continued to stay silent, even with therapy, it would eat me alive. And
Yeah.
when I did finally speak out, it felt like a weight was had been lifted off
Hmm.
of me. I
Hmm.
felt lighter. I felt
Hmm.
happier than I've ever been in my entire life over the course of the last year and a half. And I mean, I obviously had happy times. My children were born, they bring me a lot of happiness, but
Yeah.
and I got married, and but overall there's this feeling of happiness, and I feel less anxious. I feel less on edge. Like my husband and I argue less. Like our house is just like calmer
Yeah.
and better, not having this huge weight on my shoulders that was just weighing me down and causing me like this underlying pain that just affected pretty much every aspect of my life. And because was not able to talk about it, I never processed this. And
Yeah.
somebody said to me in a message recently, she said, this is a former classmate. She said that she sent me this message, and she said, I'm intrigued why I am just working at why I'm just now working through this trauma.
Mm.
I'm just now working through this trauma because I wasn't able to talk about it before.
Right.
I was still burying it, which is so common. Like it's
Yes.
not like I'm some anomaly that like some people never talk about it. They go through their whole life, but this was
Yep.
him running for city council was this catalyst that caused me to finally face this. I had to, and I had to tell my husband because I was struggling so much internally. PTSD is so it's so common
Yes.
in survivors of sexual assault, and the people who PTSD is most common in people who have been in a war or live in like a
Right.
war-torn country, or sexual assault survivors.
Hmm.
And I learned a lot of what I know from John Krakauer's book.
Yes.
Um, and this woman also told me, like she sent me this very condescending message, and that is like that's one of the reasons that I feel like unless you have actually dealt with something like this, and everybody has their trauma, and
Hmm.
people would say, well, I've been sexually assaulted and I didn't go like shouting it from the rooftops. And I'm like, okay, well, when the person who sexually assaulted you runs for city council or any other public office, or
Hmm.
then come to me and tell me what you would do. Because
Yeah.
until you walk a mile in my shoes, and then judge, or don't
Yeah.
judge, because still everybody deals with it different. Like somebody else may not have felt compelled to speak out, but I did because I felt like I'm around young people all the time because I've worked in schools and my kids are at that age, and I just
Hmm.
feel like young people need to know that their actions as a teenager or a young person will affect somebody for their rest of their life, but it should also affect you for the rest of your life.
Right.
And
Right. Agreed. And because I want to pivot a little bit into, because you're starting to segue into this in
yeah,
terms of like why. there is this massive why. Why now? Why today? Why are you on the podcast? Like I think for some people who have a really hard time to grasp what it's actually like to be a sexual assault survivor, um, because it's going to be different for every single person across the board, from regardless how similar the situations are, it doesn't matter. But at the end of the day, your body is the crime scene. This is the body that you are in until your last breath. So I understand that completely. And so when we first started, chatting, you also shared with me that you've been connecting with other really incredible survivors that have also been such a support system to you. You also got involved with Callisto. Can we talk about those things for a second? To really identify what it is that you are trying to do now, especially as a silence breaker. You are moving into this role of like advocacy. So yeah, so share more about that.
Um, so, through Instagram, I've made a lot of really good connections in this survivor support community. And there is this incredible group of women and men in this realm on Instagram. And I know social media gets it like a bad rap, and there are pros and cons to it.
Of
But the
course.
connections I've made with these people, like you,
Hmm.
like your friend Lauren,
Hmm.
Jess Michaels, I connected with her through Instagram. She posted something, I responded, and then we set up a Zoom call and we FaceTimed and we talked about our shared experiences. And she's the one that introduced me to Callisto, and
Yeah.
Jess also introduced me to her the way she's trying to reframe PTSD as PTSI because, you
Mhm.
know, when you say that somebody has a disorder that comes with a certain stigma.
Sure.
Um,
Yes.
and we're not disordered, we were injured. So what it really is a post-traumatic stress injury. And, when I came forward, and something that I talked to with Jess is that, I was attacked by
Mhm.
the perpetrator and his friends, and they called me crazy. And,
Mhm.
I, when I was speaking, when I was having those communications with his friend, I told him that I have PTSD from this traumatic thing that happened to me as a teenager. And these guys used that PTSD to call me crazy. And in these communications that they had with other people in the town that they had, it's a whole outlandish story.
Yeah.
Maybe someday I'll
Yeah.
write a book.
Yeah.
Um, but in these communications, they said that, they concocted this theory that I was in cahoots with these other people in town, people that I
Wow.
didn't know. And this one guy wrote in a communication that he accused these people of exploiting me for their own political gain, and said that it's
Mm.
outrageous because I have um, reported myself as I've self-reported as mentally ill. So
Wow.
that was me telling the other guy that I have PTSD. So these guys are weaponizing the trauma that their friend caused me to call me crazy, which is just like abhorrent. It's just beyond
Yeah.
reproach. Like it's just hard to believe that grown-ups would be that cruel.
Yeah.
Like I had already suffered so much, and these guys were more upset about me talking about what happened to me than about what happened to me,
Right.
which is which is also very common, and why people stay silent and suffer in silence for so long. But
Hmm.
anyway, back to Jess Michaels. Um, and her reframing of PTSD, like that was huge for me
Yes.
hearing her explain that to me. And I was like, you're absolutely like, and it's not fair that we get these labels when we were, this was an act committed to us. We weren't born with this.
Right.
Somebody harmed us through no fault of our own.
Right.
Um, and so Jess introduced me to Callisto, and Callisto is such an important tool, such an important resource. Callisto is an encrypted platform where victims of sexual assault can enter into their vault. It's called the Callisto Vault, and it's an online system where you enter identifying information about your perpetrator. It's not like a list of names for people
Mm-hmm.
to peruse.
Sure.
You will enter like a phone number or an Instagram handle or an email address, or there's other like identifying things that you can enter. And you are only contacted if there's a match in their system. So if you report your assault, and there's a match right away, then
Mm.
you are contacted by somebody from their legal team. And Callisto does not report to the police, and Callisto does not report to Title IX. Um, it's not a reporting platform. It's a tool that um, puts the survivor in the driver's seat, and they give you your options, and they tell you what it would look like to file a criminal complaint, what civil court would look like, what a Title IX report would look like. And if both parties agree with the match, those two people are then connected.
Okay.
And as we know, and so Callisto is so important because knowing that you are not the only one changes everything.
Right.
Um, and not just for the survivor, but also in the eyes of the community where you live. Because unfortunately, because of how society is, if you're the only one saying this, people won't believe you, or they'll be angry that you spoke out and you ruined, quote unquote, ruined the perpetrator's life with no
Hmm.
concern about how the perpetrator ruined the victim's life. Um,
Right.
so knowing that you're not the only one is, there's power in numbers,
In numbers, yes.
power in numbers. And this past November, um, after Jess Michaels had introduced me to Callisto, I decided to I organized and hosted an educational and fundraising event for Callisto in my community. It was an evening for parents and their teenage kids.
Hmm.
Um, Many of these kids are going off to college soon, and Callisto currently is only available to anybody 18 plus with a .edu email address. But
Okay.
as Callisto grows, they hope to expand to, not just people who are students with a .edu email address. And, and I feel that Callisto, I want to spread awareness about it for
Hmm.
students, to be able to use this and know about it, but also, someday it may also be able to help me to know
Yeah.
that I am not alone and I'm not the only one. Because, in Callisto, the stats that they talk about, that, 90% of sexual assaults are committed by serial perpetrators who
Right.
harm on average 6 times over the course of 4 years of college. So when this happened to me, like I'm not saying that he did this again, but if there was another victim out there,
Hmm.
I wouldn't be able to know about it without a system like Callisto. And that's why it's so important for young people today. And not only will it reduce, if they could stop serial perpetrators after one match, it would reduce sexual assaults on college campuses by 59%, which is
Wow.
significant, but probably would even reduce it even greater, because just perpetrators or would-be perpetrators, knowing that Callisto exists is a deterrent because they know that their victims can connect,
Right.
and accountability is more likely to happen. Like, because as you know, things, well, Callisto, they've already had success in their matching system, but the more awareness we spread about it and the more people that know about it and use it, the more sexual assaults will be prevented.
Absolutely. And I'll be sure to link their information so that people can find out more, especially if they want to, support Callisto's efforts. I really appreciate you taking that time and breaking that down. But I'm so glad to hear that you are, still doing the work alongside them. Again, as a campus survivor myself, just endless gratitude for everything that you are trying to accomplish. And I
It's
know that there was a quote that you really wanted to read at the end of your story. So please feel free to share that.
So in the fall of 2023, I came across an interview, um, a Chris Wallace interview with Padma Lakshmi.
Uh-huh.
So she had written an op-ed in the New York Times, um, sometime before this interview aired, and they talked about the op-ed. So Padma was sexually assaulted when she was 16, by a guy that she was dating, and like me, she had never had sex before, so this was her first sexual experience, which is, you know, any sexual assault is traumatic, but for this to be your first experience with that it just, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's probably, it makes it even more significant. I mean, in my mind, maybe that's not true. But when I came across this interview, I watched it over and over again. And one of the things that she said at the end of the interview is, so she wrote the New York Times piece, and then she said she took to bed and for 3 days. And when she finally went back out, she went to the gym, and a woman came up to her and said to her, "That happened to me."
Mm.
And she said, "I want to thank you for writing that article." And then Padma said that she was in line at Penn Station for the train, and a woman came up to her and said, "I didn't read your article, but um, a guy that I went to college with did, and he sent me an email with the link to your article, and he said, 'I'm sorry.'"
Mm.
And I watched that over and over again, and I said, I kept wondering, why couldn't the perpetrator of my assault, have been like that,
Mhm.
shown any tiny bit of remorse? So then I looked up her op-ed, and in the op-ed, she said something that really stuck out to me, and I wrote it down, and I just wanted to share because it was so meaningful to me and probably so many other people. And I'm so grateful that she wrote this article and that this op-ed and that she did this interview with Chris Wallace that I found. So she wrote, "Some say a man shouldn't pay a price for an act he committed as a teenager, but the woman pays the price for the rest of her life, and so do the people who love her. We all have a lot to lose if we put a time limit on telling the truth about sexual assault, and if we hold on to the codes of silence that for generations have allowed men to hurt women with impunity."
Mm.
And
Wow.
those couple of sentences were just, really impacted me. And
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. I really, really appreciate that and how that
yes,
resonated with you. And yes,
yeah,
I
and I
I would
feel like
agree.
it'll resonate with other survivors who may be listening to this, and maybe they um, will read her whole op-ed. And but anyway, I'm very
Oh,
grateful for all the
yeah.
women who came before me because they inspired me. Dr. Ford, I just, someday maybe I'll get to meet her. But her book, when I read her book when it came out, and so much of what she went through leading up to the hearings
Mhm.
that summer was the identical feelings that I was feeling leading up to the election in 2023 of the city council. And, it doesn't matter if the person is running for president of the United States or, a Supreme Court justice or just, local government or president of the HOA. It's still the same trauma that resurrects and the same feelings when the person that did this horrible thing to you is now going around saying what a good person they are, and maybe they do some good things in their life, but the reality is you did do this terrible thing, and people need to take responsibility for their actions.
Absolutely. Well, Anne, it has been, I know this hasn't been easy. And again, I just want to stress, I'm so grateful for your bravery, one, for breaking your silence in such a difficult capacity when you feel like nobody is listening, nobody's on your side, and the fact that you're still fighting the good fight really, really says something. So thank you for, again, sharing your story with these listeners, and I really do hope that justice is served for you one day. But truly, we do need more survivors speaking their truth. So you did one of the hardest things today. So thank you so much for
Well,
sharing
I
your
feel
story.
like, well, my justice is at this point helping others.
Absolutely. And I'm right there with you. All right, Miss Anne. Well, we are running a little short on time, but I
Okay.
did want to make sure that I asked you some fun, lighthearted questions,
Okay.
so that people can get to know Anne a little
Okay.
bit better. So, first and foremost, what's the most interesting thing you have read, watched, or listened to lately?
There's a very special place in my heart for the show Schitt's Creek, and that
Yeah.
show got me through the very difficult time of the second half of 2023, and that is the Rose family at all are my comfort people.
Mm,
And I would say that that is a show that something that I watch kind of on repeat, because when I'm
yeah.
feeling like I can't focus on something, I just put that show on, and it just makes me happy. It brings me joy.
I love that. And it is one of my absolute favorite shows, so I'm right there with
Yeah.
you.
Like the
Love
joy
that.
that they bring to me when I'm having a hard time is like, and
Yeah.
artists like actors and the people who wrote the show, like they should know how much, how meaningful something like it's entertainment, but it's also uh,
Mhm.
it's just so much more than just a show.
Absolutely. It's so cathartic.
Yeah.
Well, I want to make sure that I ask you this, and I know you've mentioned a few people in this interview, but I would love to know who is a hero of yours and why.
Jess Michaels and Tracy DiTomasi. I feel like they've kind of taken me under their wing, and they have taught me so much. Um, and a lot of the things I say in my Tracy is the CEO of Callisto. A lot of things that I say in my advocacy and in my activism are things that I've learned from them. And there's so much work to be done in education. And we like to think that we're living in more enlightened times in 2025. But in my experience, there are people that are still living in with the same 1980s like rape culture, like don't talk about this, sweep it under the
Yeah.
rug. That we're not, and people say these things with such confidence, that
Mhm.
they're right and that I don't know what I'm talking about, but I'm learning from the best. Tracy has
Yeah.
been doing this work for 25 years, and her and the other people that I've connected with on Instagram, Dr. Ford, she is such a huge inspiration. The women in Dr. Krakauer's book, Dr. Lissick, like I read everything that he has written. Like these people, they're so smart and they've done such important work. And I mean, things are, even though there's still so much work to be done, things are better than they
Yeah.
were in 1990.
Absolutely. Well, I love these answers. And again, Anne, goes without saying, again, just thank you so much for reaching out, doing this, and sharing your story. I really do hope, you check in with me along the way, and maybe we'll get you back on here, especially if you have another Callisto event coming up, because we want to make sure that we are still amplifying their message and what they are doing. And thank you so much for advocating for them, for advocating for other survivors, but most importantly, advocating for yourself, which is one of the hardest things that you can do as a survivor. And I know it feels like an uphill battle at all times, but
And I didn't some people say that you're just looking for attention. There's not one piece of this that I have enjoyed,
yeah,
but at the same time, it's important to be able to talk about this and not sweep things under the rug anymore.
100%.
Yeah.
Well, Anne, thank you so much again. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Thank you. I'm glad to know you.
Likewise. This is True Crime in Hollywood, a personal tale, a La Activista production, with music by Mickey O'Brien. Don't forget to like, share, and leave a review for the show. Thank you for listening, and as always, remember the victims and embrace the survivors.